The Ukrainian armed forces are striking the Russian trenches harder at every step, thanks to the motivation and achievements they have earned. And they are inching closer and closer to a greater victory with each passing day. Putin is continuing his attempts to rejuvenate his army, despite its low morale and advanced stage. He makes an appeal to his allies to help him with this. But we can see that his allies who are willing to voluntarily assist Putin are abandoning him one by one. Without a shadow of a doubt, Putin's ally with the greatest geopolitical importance is Belarus. On the other hand, Lukashenko and Putin have significant points of contention between them. At the same time, there are significant conflicts and divergences of opinion between the armed forces of Russia and Belarus. Putin is aggravating the Belarusian people and army by acting in the opposite direction of what Lukashenko wants, which is a ceasefire in Ukraine and non-involvement in the conflict that is taking place there. The rhetoric that Lukashenko is using is something that Putin did not anticipate, and the Belarusians appear to favor Ukraine by behaving in this manner. It's possible that Lukashenko is attempting to save his own dictatorship from collapse. Who could say? In a similar vein, the population of Belarus and the armed forces are opposed to both Lukashenko and Putin. The fact that Belarusian anti-war groups have blown up Russian military posts, barracks, and airports in Belarus lends credence to this theory. In particular, the internal tensions between Russian soldiers and Belarusian officers who are stationed on Belarusian soil lend credence to this theory. Because of the escalating animosity between the soldiers of both armies, there is a significant risk that Belarusian and Russian troops will become involved in a serious conflict with one another because Russian officers have the view that they are superior to Belarusian officers. This attitude can lead to both verbal and physical conflict between the two groups of army personnel. At this time, we can observe that the armed forces of Ukraine are on high alert, particularly at all of the borders with Belarus that are located in the north. Vladimir Putin is obviously quite competent in a plan that he will carry out through Belarus. But when we look at the relationship between the army of Belarus and the army of Russia, we realize that this is not something that is going to be easy to accomplish because the Belarusian people and their army want to avoid getting involved in the battle that is going on in the background. They don't appear to appreciate it when the Russian army gives them orders. I often state that I prefer to work alone as opposed to participating in a collaboration that is neither controlled nor organized. To this point, the Russian and Belarusian armies have managed to get along reasonably well, despite the lack of coordination between them. If the Ukraine takes action in this manner, they will unquestionably be acting in their own best interests. On the other hand, there are reports that relations between the Russians and their Belarusian host are becoming more tense, which raises the possibility of a big clash developing. This might deal a blow of catastrophic proportions to Putin's army. According to some sources, Russian soldiers insulted their Belarusian counterparts in a way that was racially tinged, which caused the Belarusian soldiers to become furious. In addition, the level of animosity that exists between the militaries of the two governments is growing. In Belarus, there have been many instances of confrontation that may be traced back to precedents set by the disdainful attitude that the Russian army has shown towards Belarusians. It is impossible for the Belarusian military police to put a stop to the criminal actions of the Russians. In particular, reports that were filed by top Russian officers and that were based on the accusations of their own soldiers demonstrate that Russians express contempt for Belarusians and behaved in an offensive manner toward them. The number of such incidents that have occurred in the past is quickly increasing, which is contributing to an uncontrolled escalation of tensions in Belarus. According to additional sources, an increasing number of officers serving in the Belarusian armed forces are becoming disgruntled with the political and military leadership of their country as a result of the risk of becoming embroiled in Putin's war. During the course of the last few days, we discussed this topic. We are aware that a number of Belarusian officers deserted their postings in order to participate in the conflict in Ukraine. In the meantime, A large number of Belarusian soldiers are fighting alongside them on the front lines to support the legitimate cause of Ukraine. According to reports, thousands of Belarusian troops escaped their country and joined the Ukrainian armed forces in order to fight against the Russian army. At this juncture, I'd like to share with you an excerpt from an interview I had with a Belarusian soldier who served at the front lines in Ukraine. The Belarusian soldier claims that he will do everything in his power to free Ukraine from the unfair occupation by the Russians as quickly as possible, and that after their mission in Ukraine is successful, they will begin an uprising in Belarus directed against Lukashenko. As part of its ongoing efforts to bolster its presence in Ukraine, the Russian military routinely deploys troops to the country that is its neighbor, Russia, which has been engaging in this activity for an extended period of time, acknowledged its participation in the updates. It has conducted a military drill in the neighboring country of Belarus. The most recent reports obtained from Russian intelligence indicate that approximately 12,000 Russian soldiers have been sent to Belarus. In September, it was also reported by the military intelligence of Ukraine that Lukashenko was making preparations to shelter as many as 20,000 Russian troops who had been mobilized. At the 230th Combined Arms Opus Lesnevsky training site in Bethel, Belarus, and military instructors are now putting Russian troops through their paces in a training exercise. It would appear that Lukashenko is coming under more and more pressure to send troops to Ukraine, and he is making preparations to send his army there. According to the Ukrainian General Staff, it is thought that the Belarusian army recruited 10,000 soldiers in the fall, and there have been recent rumors that Belarusian medics have gotten their calling papers. Both of these statistics are based on information provided by the Ukrainian General Staff. The actions taken to prepare for war prompted a response from certain elements of Lukashenko's army because of the risk of pulling the republic into conflict. The Belarusian border service soldiers and other members of this country's armed forces are expressing an increasing level of dissatisfaction with the actions taken by the military and political leadership of Belarus because of his participation in the conflict in Ukraine during his last tenure in office. Lukashenko is facing significant backlash from the people of his own country. We have no doubt that Putin would have preferred for Lukashenko to have had a larger role in the affair, but I seriously doubt that Lukashenko has any interest in doing that. This would turn out to be one of his biggest failures, as Lukashenko would just barely make it through the anti-government protests in 2020, when he would become the leader of Belarus for the 6th time. Even among those who support Russia's participation in the conflict, opposition to it is growing. In the end, they have no interest in serving as pawns for Putin or Lukashenko and have no intention of doing so even at the outset of the war. Just 28% of Belarusians backed Russian attacks, and that number has gone all the way down to 11% today. The Russian military has been launching regular attacks from the north, that is through Belarus, and has been making attempts to penetrate the Kremlin ever since it declared its plan to send 1.5 million troops to Ukraine and provide unlimited money for the conflict there. Putin's policy of silent mobilization resulted in the recruitment of 147,000 new soldiers for the Russian army. In addition, tens of thousands of soldiers and a large quantity of ammunition were sent to Belarus. It's possible that the Russian army will launch an unexpected offensive in Kiev through Belarus. 12,000 of the newly recruited soldiers are currently preparing to be transported to the Ukrainian fronts after receiving their initial training in Russian camps in Belarus. This is being done in order to relieve the Eastern Front and replenish its supply of ammunition and troops. The significance of Belarus as a strategic location, which is going to be utilized in an additional attack on Kiev in 2023, is tremendous. But Putin needs to find a solution to a very serious situation. While emotions have been skyrocketing in recent days as a result of racial slurs, Belarusian and Russian soldiers came dangerously close to starting a civil war. According to some sources, Russian soldiers insulted their Belarusian counterparts in a way that was racially tinged, which caused the Belarusian soldiers to become furious. The Russian offensive launched in Kiev on February 24, 2022, and Belarus played a significant role as a facilitator in the operation. However, it is highly unlikely that the Belarusian and Russian troops that are currently conducting these exercises will now form a force capable of launching a successful new attack on northern Ukraine. This is due to the fact that during the Kiev attack that began on February 24, 2022, Ukraine slapped them very hard, and the damage caused by the slap is still present today in Russia's initial onslaught. Belarus served as a staging area and launch pad. On the other hand, the Ukrainian armed forces are significantly more equipped for this conflict. The danger posed by Belarus might put a halt to the Belarusians' logical invasion routes, which are a mental death trap and are already protected. The Ukrainians are well aware of what to anticipate the next time. They must organize an entire army in preparation for an assault in the north. When compared to the highly motivated Ukrainian forces, the Russian troops appear to have a very lackadaisical attitude. We are aware of how significant a role morale plays as a component in business change on the battlefield. Belarusian soldiers are also aware of the crisis that has befallen the Russian army, and they believe that Russia has lost the will to win. As a result of the situation, if one looks at the history of Russia, the price of losing a war is the overthrow of the existing system. But Vladimir Putin has been able to maintain power for the time being since the Putin administration has been unable to refresh its forces since the mobilization order it issued in early September. This is the primary reason why Vladimir Putin did not end the war. He no longer has anything to lose by continuing the conflict, so he has no incentive to do so. The opening of an early new front will almost certainly result in a withdrawal of forces. Ukrainian military leaders have sounded the alarm warning of a new invasion in the country's northern region. This comes despite the fact that Russian soldiers are decreasing in size. Putin is able to play his ace of spades, which is his final trump card. However, if he loses this one, he would have lost everything. The conflict in Ukraine had significant repercussions for Russia on multiple fronts, including the military, the socio-economic system, diplomatic relations, and political affairs. As the battle drags on, the land that is controlled by Vladimir Putin, which is in a much worse state than the Russia that was formerly part of the Soviet Union, sinks deeper and deeper into the swamp, because the economic sanctions imposed by the United States and the West both hammer Russia in this conflict and disgrace Russia in the world political arena. Russia, which is headed into darkness, is severely destroyed by economic sanctions. The fact that Russia is perceived to be the side that will suffer the most damage as a result of this conflict is regarded as a seriously tragicomic circumstance. If we look into this matter a bit further, we can see more clearly that the impacts of the conflict struck the Russian oligarchs the most as a consequence of this. Russian oligarchs and significant corporations whose economic equilibrium was disrupted were no longer able to finance the conflict in Ukraine. In fact, this is one of the most compelling illustrations of how socio-economic pressure can bring about the downfall of a nation. In other words, Russia is entirely vanishing in the shadow of the war in Ukraine, which is a direct result of the restrictive sanctions imposed by the United States and the West. Nobody says anything, nor does anyone desire to put an end to the situation. In fact, the United States of America and its Western allies in Ukraine have not stopped applying sanctions against Russia since Russia initiated the war in Ukraine. There have been more than 11,000 sanctions placed upon the country. The United States of America imposed the most sanctions against Russia in 1948. In this regard, the United States took a whole new stride forward by securing the cooperation of the United Kingdom. New sanctions aimed at Russia's upper class have been declared by the United States of America and the United Kingdom. The additional limits are being put in place with the intention of reducing Russia's capacity to circumvent the sanctions that were placed on it following its invasion of Ukraine. More than 120 institutions, assets, and individuals in more than 20 nations and jurisdictions are affected by the sanctions, which were implemented by the United States Treasury and State Departments in collaboration with the United Kingdom. Penalties have been placed on a number of entities, including Russian private military organizations, a company with its headquarters in China, and a Russian bank with operations in Hungary. Naturally, Russia and its allies are the focus of the sanctions. The steps are a reflection of the attempt made by the U.S. government to widen the scope of the sanctions that have been imposed on Moscow since Russian President Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, and in an effort to suppress efforts to circumvent it. One of the primary targets has been the Russian billionaire businessman Alisher Usmanov. Usmanov ensured that the United States Treasury had an extensive business network to handle financial transactions in financial safe havens and among family members, which could potentially circumvent sanctions. The sanctions' level of influence might be seen through the wealth of this individual. The piece of artwork, which was given the name of Usmanov's mother, was believed to be worth between $600 and $735 million, according to the United States Department of the Treasury. Dilbar possesses 2 helipads and one of the world's largest indoor pools that has ever been constructed on a ship, with an annual operating cost of around $60 million. According to reports from the United States Department of State, the billionaire targeted both his own company, USM Holdings, and a number of connected businesses. The corporation asserted that Usmanov, who had been subject to sanctions imposed by the United States in the distant past, had withdrawn from business activity and did not participate in the management of the company. In addition, the corporation stated that it found the actions to be unfair and without foundation. But United States Foreign Minister Antony Blinken emphasized that the United States will continue to take action against Russia and anyone who supports its war in Ukraine. The words made by Blinken were, in fact, consistent with the pledge made by the Group of Seven to inflict severe penalties on actors from other countries. In addition, the United States government went after the private military company Patriot. According to the State Department, Patriot has ties to the Russian Minister of Defense, Sergei Shoigu, and is in direct competition with the Wagner mercenary group. The sanctions were also directed against Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of Wagner's subsidiaries, as well as the director of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The aerospace technology company, which is based in China and sells satellite photos, was another target since it supplied Wagner with satellite images of several sites in Ukraine. In addition, the United States Treasury went after a business called Kingpike Technology, which claims is a China-based supplier for various entities that are part of Russia's military-industrial complex. The United States Department of State accused Rosatom of using energy exports to exert political and economic pressure on its customers. It also announced that 5 entities and 1 person that are a part of the Russian state nuclear power company Rosatom were also targeted in an attempt to restrict the company. However, the United States government did not impose sanctions on Rosatom. In addition to these businesses, the United States of America has its sights set on the following organizations that are organized under Usmanov's USM Holdings: the Russian mobile operator Megafon Metaloinvest, Russia's largest iron ore producer, including Metaloinvest, Swiss and UAE-based subsidiaries of the Russia-based Yudokan Copper Project, and Akinga Aranzman, a cement producer based in Uzbekistan. The participation of Megafon, which is one of the 4 major telecom companies in Russia, in light of the fact that Western sanctions have up to now been unable to target Russia's telecommunications infrastructure megaphones, the inclusion of Russia on the U.S. sanctions list represents a shift. The press office has declared that they want to contest the sanctions since they believe that they are an unfair and illegitimate step that has no basis in reality. In the meantime, The United States Treasury Department has informed the press that it will be imposing penalties on the International Investment Bank, which is situated in Budapest, a bank that is owned by the most notorious criminal organization with whom several nations in Europe have previously cut ties, and 3 current or former directors, 3 directors of the bank who are currently serving or previously served sanctions were placed against Russian citizens Nikolai Nikolaevich Kosov and Georgy Nazarovich Potapov, as well as the Hungarian citizen Imre Miloslavsky. According to the United States Treasury Department, it is possible for Russia to expand its intelligence footprint in Europe, thanks to the bank. This opens the door for the harmful influence of the Kremlin in Central Europe and the Western Balkans. And it also has the potential to function as a mechanism for corrupt practices and the financing of unlawful activities. In addition, the Treasury Department went after Sequoia Troyan Trust RAC, a trust services company established in Liechtenstein, whose clientele turned out to include members of Russia's elite, such as Gennady Nikolaevich Timchenko. In a statement pertaining to the issue, the British Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, revealed that they had entirely cut off the network that was accessible to the Russian elite and those who tried to assist those who would steal money to fund a war. It is unknown how much longer Russia will be able to prolong the conflict in Ukraine as a result of all of these sanctions. Nevertheless, due to the hefty economic restrictions, Moscow will most likely considerably lower the proportion of its spending that goes into the weapons industry. Russia, which is unable to muster an adequate number of forces on Ukrainian territory, will have a difficult time recovering from the effects of these economic sanctions, as will the United States of America. One of Ukraine's most significant friends, Russia, was hit with more than just economic sanctions, though. In addition, the United States has supplied Ukraine with a large quantity of armaments as part of its efforts, which have been ongoing for more than a year to thwart an invasion by Russia and to try to choke the economy of Russia. If you recall, the government of the United States announced a new military assistance package with an exact spending total of $2.6 billion. Patriots, which are designed to defend against airplanes, cruise missiles, and tactical ballistic missiles, were also included in this package. A striking fact becomes clear when one takes into account all of the military assistance that has been supplied to the Ukrainian army, as well as the economic sanctions that have been put on Russia. It is essential to understand that the conflict in Ukraine has evolved into a battle of attrition over time. Both sides of the conflict do not have a limitless supply of ammunition, and the Ukrainian army is in a far more advantageous position than the Russian army in terms of the amount of military aid that is being delivered to it. Therefore, one of the most crucial aspects of winning this battle of attrition is the continual provision of military aid. The Ukrainians will have a better chance of winning this battle against a far more powerful military force than they do. Nevertheless, assistance to the Ukrainian army must be maintained until the conclusion of the conflict. You are able to help us out by clicking on the Super Thanks button down below to ensure that you are notified when we upload new videos. Please ensure that you have subscribed to our channel and that notifications are turned on. Our knowledgeable team takes great care in preparing our material for you. The war in Ukraine has become an unexpected stimulus for the militarization and rearmament of countries around the world. The fact that Russia initially threatened the boundaries of Eastern Europe and then allowed the conflict to spread to much larger territories was a major source of concern for the member states of NATO. The reason for this was because the individuals who made up the worldwide alliance and were located in the Eastern Bloc were in danger. The importance of Poland as a deterrent has recently risen to the forefront, thanks to the fact that it is one of these members. Poland has been viewed as the U.S. military base in Eastern Europe and the NATO Eastern Bulwark. Ever since the conflict in Ukraine began, Poland has played the role of a kind of savior in the eastern region by acting as a barrier to Russia's advances into Ukraine and by providing a safe haven for Ukrainians to seek asylum in. Because of the growing dangers, The government in Warsaw has only recently begun to place a greater emphasis on strengthening its own military capabilities rather than relying solely on those of NATO. Both the combined military force and the number of armament activities taking place in the country have reached record highs. The rearmament efforts that Poland is making are being applauded by the other member nations of NATO. For instance, Germany stands to gain from the presence of an armed Poland because this results in the formation of a geographical buffer zone between Russia and Germany. This rearmament is also favorably received in this regard because it fits into a strategy of equipping its partners against international adversaries so that they don't have to directly fight in wars with unclear outcomes. This allows the partners to avoid having to engage in direct conflict. As a result of this, Poland got to work on putting its strategy into action so that it could boost its military force as quickly as possible and become home to one of the most powerful armies in the world. Because of this, growing suspicions that Poland would one day be inside a Kremlin seeking to return to the days when the Russian Empire reached all the way up to the Vistula River have been substantially lessened. As a bold ally of Ukraine, Poland has announced that it will embark on the largest rearmament maneuver in the past 50 years. This comes as a result of the diminishing dangers posed by Russia. Poland is well on its way to becoming the superpower of Eastern Europe. Poland's primary focus should be on achieving the highest feasible degree of national security as rapidly as possible. Developing a powerful military is Poland's sole hope of achieving this goal. The planned Polish army will be sufficiently powerful to dissuade any possible aggressor from launching an attack against Poland. In order to accomplish this goal, Poland has placed an initial order with South Korea for 1,000 K2 main battle tanks and with the United States for 250 brand new M1A2 SEP V3 Abrams tanks. Tanks of the M1A2 V3 Abrams family are considered to be of the third generation. However, the enhancements that they have got move them closer to fourth place. In addition, the K2 Panther tanks are the world's most advanced tanks at the moment and the first tanks of the fourth generation. This will establish Poland as the most powerful tanking nation in Europe, surpassing the UK in that regard by 27 months. In addition, Poland's participation in the arms race is primarily dependent on artillery and armored units. In this regard, the Polish artillery will be assisted by the arrival of 600K rockets from South Korea, 18 HIMARS launches with 9,000 rockets, and 288K and 239 MRL systems. All of these will take place simultaneously. There are around 1,000 Borsuk infantry fighting vehicles produced in Poland and stored in the Polish arsenal. These vehicles will lead Polish troops into battle. 96 Apache H-64 aircraft imported from the United States of America. Additionally, Poland will receive robust air assistance from South Korea in the form of 48 Fa-50 airplanes that are already on order. In addition, Poland and the United States came to an agreement on a purchase for 4.9 billion euros for 250 Abrams tanks and 4.6 billion euros for 32 Farads 35 planes. Both of these deals were inked in Warsaw. In addition, Poland intends to purchase weapons from South Korea for an amount ranging from $10 to $12 billion. The budget proposed by Poland for Seoul will consist of a variety of military-grade weapons and hardware, including 180 K2 tanks, 200 K9 Thunder howitzers, 48 Fa-50 aircraft, and 218 Chama K2 39 rocket launchers. The result of all of this will be that the Polish army will be twice as large. To put it another way, Poland is going to build the most powerful army in all of Europe. At this point in time, the Polish army is widely considered to be among the most formidable and well-equipped militaries in all of Europe. Poland, in contrast to several of NATO's other members, allocated 2.4% of its GDP to military spending even before fighting broke out in Ukraine. To achieve this goal, Poland allotted 4% of its GDP to the country's defense budget this year. This is equivalent to having twice as much as what is required by NATO. As a result, Poland surpassed all other members of the alliance to become the nation with the highest level of military spending relative to its population. Some of the new equipment deals took place before the conflict in Ukraine, when Poland, which was already aware of the threat posed by Russia, started to renew its military forces, which were still encumbered with a considerable number of pieces of equipment dating back to the Soviet era. Putin's invasion sped up the process, which ultimately resulted in the signing of a number of new contracts. The Polish Minister of Defense, Mariusz Błaszczak, made the observation that the illegal attack carried out by the Russian Federation on Ukraine and the unpredictability of Putin further expedited the process of modernizing Poland's military hardware. Prior to Warsaw's decision to raise the country's GDP, there were 150,000 soldiers in Poland's armed forces. This figure was only 20,000 below the total number of soldiers that Germany had in the Polish army. 30,000 of these men were sent to regional defense units, which were modeled after the ones in the Ukrainian army. But Poland wants to go even further by encouraging the goal of spending 5% of its GDP on the army and establishing Europe's largest land army with 300,000 soldiers, as promised by the country's defense minister, Mariusz Błaszczak. In addition, discussions are also taking place between Poland and the United Kingdom concerning the joint construction of a sizable arms plant. This would be done in part to aid in the production and maintenance of equipment and weaponry for Ukraine. In addition to the construction of the armaments factory, Poland intends to spend a total of £85 billion on guns by 2035, with a record-breaking annual defense expenditure of £18 billion. Additionally, when extra funds from the budget are included, Poland's defense budget will reach £24 billion. Because the budget figures assigned to military expenditures by Poland, including those of its NATO partners, are so close to being the global record, Russia's anxieties are going to be heightened to significant levels as a result of these figures. On the other hand, in order to assist Poland, the Congress of the United States approved money for the Polish military up to $288.6 million in order to deter and protect against the growing threat that Russia poses. The astonishing cash surge will be of assistance to the Polish government from an economic aspect. Nonetheless, inflation is now hovering at 17% and has slowed down in defense spending due to economic growth. It is possible that it will be tough to meet, but a solution to this problem appears to have been found as well. Poland intends to eliminate the budget deficit that has been created as a result of the increase in the country's military spending, by utilizing some of the funds that will be provided by the EU. In addition, Poland will not be placed in a highly precarious economic position because it will continue to get support from the United States of America and other Western states. The results of the polls will consequently have eliminated any and all hurdles that stood in the way of achieving the goal of having the most powerful army in the world. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, made a startling observation regarding this magnificent strategy to establish military strength in Poland, which is something that countries all over the world envy. According to Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, this dynamic has been regarded as the most significant reorganization of collective military defense since the end of the Cold War. Yes, Stoltenberg was absolutely correct in that regard, because when we consider Russia's invasion of Ukraine in terms of location, the fact that Russia has an ally such as Belarus places Kiev in a precarious position. However, in the coming days, Poland, which will have one of the strongest armies in the world, will be placed directly on the border of Belarus, which will provide a welcome burst of fresh air for the Kiev administration. On the other hand, Poland desires that all contacts with Moscow be fully severed and that Russia be brought under its control. This sentiment is shared by the countries of the Baltic region and of Central Europe. These nations are of the opinion that any circumstance that may be interpreted as a win for Russia would be detrimental to the security of Europe. On the other hand, Poland is advocating for more EU sanctions to be implemented against Russia. The Prime Minister, Mateusz Morawiecki, has stated that the disciplinary actions that have been implemented up to this point are insufficient. In addition, the people of Poland are not hesitant to offer military assistance to Ukraine and to put pressure on governments to increase the severity of sanctions against Russia. In this regard, Poland announced that it will provide Ukraine with 4 MiG fighter jets that were manufactured during the time of the Soviet Union after Russia's invasion of Ukraine the previous year. Poland was the first NATO country to send jets to the region to provide support. In a nutshell, Poland, which in recent days has been at the vanguard of Russia's aggression against Ukraine, is both boosting its troops and attempting to provide as much help to Ukraine as is humanly possible.